Everyone, and welcome to today's webinar delivered by Dolmors. We'll find out more about patents and the latest developments in the field. So we've got a really exciting presentation here for you. Before I hand over to our presenter, I just wanted to remind everyone that the presentation today will be recorded and the session will be shared later online. The webinar will include an approximately 45-minute presentation followed by a Q&A session at the end. Please use the Q&A panel to submit any questions and we'll do our best to answer as many of those as possible. I would also like to thank Hexagon, who are sponsoring today's webinar. They're a global leader in digital reality solutions and make manufacturing smarter. So you can find out more about what they do on their website, hexagonmi.com. Now, without further ado, I will hand over to John, who will lead today's presentation. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Lena. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this lovely day yet again. So it's nice to have your presence here. Yes, Peter and I are from Dolmors, who many of you may know or know of. We're a firm of patent and trademark attorneys actually based in Watford, and we've been members of the STC for several years now. So today we thought we'd give you a little presentation on some aspects of patents in particular, including a brand new change that has only happened from this month, from the 1st of June, and also about the patent box tax relief scheme, which has been going for several years now. And we thought it'd be useful to just give you a sort of an overview on that again, to remind you, particularly with the changes in the corporation tax recently, which makes it more advantageous. So essentially, we're going to talk to you about what we've entitled it, Making Patents Work for You. And I will start off by talking about the patent box tax relief scheme, which was actually introduced by the government back in 2013. It was originally an idea by Gordon Brown back in the days of the Labour government and has been developed a little since then. So start by saying, well, what are patents essentially all about? Why are there patents? Obviously, patents have been in existence for well over 100 years, for a long time. Patents are designed to promote innovation, to help develop new products and processes, and ultimately to boost the economy by virtue of these things. Essentially, a patent is a bargain between the state and the patentee. And the bargain is such that in return for a 20-year monopoly in your invention, to stop other people from copying the invention without your permission, you get this monopoly for up to 20 years, provided you keep the patent in force during that time. And after that 20 years, the patented idea belongs to us all, it belongs to society. So it goes to improve everyone's life, in theory, in society. The shortcomings of this from the point of view of an individual economy, like the British economy, is that in general, innovation and profits are made worldwide. So if you have a British patent, that doesn't necessarily mean that the benefits to the economy are being made in the UK, and money is going into the British economy and the British revenue. So one thing that was considered several years ago was how to encourage innovation and profit in the UK, and therefore encourage the British economy. So the solution to that was the patent box. Now, essentially, the idea of the patent box is that if you have a product upon which you have a British patent, or certain other patents, you can have significant corporation tax relief on your income made by selling that product. And so it's a way of encouraging innovation and patenting in the UK to essentially encourage the British economy. And it does this by encouraging British patentees to keep more of their money. As a guide, the UK corporation tax, as you all know, increased this year from 19%, I believe it was, right up to 25%. Obviously, a huge increase that was obviously controversial, but has gone ahead. And from April this year, all profits above £250,000 are taxed corporation tax at 25%. The patent box rate reduces this down to only 10%. So you only pay 10% tax on products, on profits made on products sold or methods made, used, licenses in the UK, which is obviously a significant benefit. So in order to be able to gain from the patent box, a company must obviously have a patent. So a company must own, or they may exclusively license a patent covering the product. Now, a patent covers an invention, but obviously an invention is incorporated into a product. And the patent box scheme says that this patent must have been granted by either the UK Intellectual Property Office, the UK Patent Office, the European Patent Office, or it can be a patent granted by certain other countries in Europe. Examples there: Austria, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Spain, and so on. Interesting, it's not Germany, France, Italy, the sort of big companies. But in the main, you would require a UK or European patent. And as well as that, the company must have made a significant contribution to the creation of the patented invention, the company actually owning the patent and claiming the relief. Or alternatively, done a significant amount of activity to develop the patented invention, a product incorporating the invention, or a process incorporating the patented invention, because you can have a patent not only on a product, but also on a method. So a method of making a product. You can have a patent on that, and you can claim tax relief on use of this method. And in addition, more recently, a change was made to the patent box scheme, the so-called modified nexus, which came in, the change was made in 2016, and says that essentially this qualifying development or contribution must have been carried out in the UK. Previously, it was found when the system first came into force that a lot of the creative input might have been done abroad, particularly by companies part of larger groups or larger corporations. But now it has changed somewhat to say that the qualifying development must have been carried out in the UK. So how has the patent box scheme actually worked out? How do you work out the actual relief you get? Well, it's complicated. It's a very complicated thing that does require accountants to do their calculations. There's several very good accounting firms, members of the STC, and we've worked with several of them as well. In the patent box process, we obtain the patent for the client, and then they go to the accountants, who then deal with the patent box tax relief. So the patent box tax relief takes into account income attributable to a patented invention, such as licensing and royalty income, sales of products, uses of a patented invention, and so on. And it is worth mentioning that if a patent relates to a particular feature, then sales of a product in which that is an integral part, you can claim patent box tax relief on the profits you make from the sales of that whole product, not just, you don't have to just separate out the particular bit. So the example given here, which is probably quite an extreme one, is if a patent relates to, say, a small mounting bearing for a suspension system of a car, then if that mounting bearing is considered to be an integral part of a car, a vehicle, you can actually claim patent box tax relief on income derived from the sales of the whole vehicle, which is obviously quite significant, and is much more significant than just the actual part you would attribute to sales of that tiny little bearing. And then you calculate a proportion of income attributable to the patent itself. And that is, again, a calculation that the accountant can do, and that the HMRC will need to look at. For example, you may take off, they may take off income related to marketing, general sort of business administration, that kind of thing. But for companies selling patented products or licensing their patent, the calculation does start from the total sales of products incorporating the invention, or as it says here, the profit from licensing invention, and then you take off some deductions before you end up with the final figure, which is deemed to be attributable to the actual patent, the benefit of owning the actual patent, but still is significant, particularly, as I said, with the increase in corporation tax that's just come in. In addition, companies which use IP patents to perform processes or provide services will also benefit from the patent box system up to the length of an arm's length royalty for use on the qualifying IP. So it's quite broad the types of things you can use the patent relief on, as long as there is this qualifying activity that you, the actual owner of the patent, has made a significant contribution in the invention or the development of the IP. In addition, even though you have to have a British or a European patent or certain other patents, in fact, provided there is this qualifying patent or whatever, then products that you make from sales of the product in other jurisdictions, USA, Japan, China, elsewhere, will still qualify for this patent box tax relief, provided obviously you're paying UK corporation tax on them, which is actually quite significant. So if you're selling products to America, but the profits are being taxed in this country by UK corporation tax, you can still claim the benefit of those products, even though you may not have a patent in USA itself. In terms of strategy, the patent box has introduced certain changes to patenting techniques. As you may or may not know, when you apply for a conventional patent application, and this is what people have done for well over 100 years, you are trying to get cover for your invention as broadly as possible. You're trying to cover modifications, changes that people might conceivably make, so that if someone makes a product that's like yours, but uses the same principles, but is slightly different, you could still be able to stock them under your patent. And that's great, and that works. The problem with that is that you therefore have to draft your patent specification broadly. You try to draft it to cover as many variations as possible. And then when the patent gets examined, because there's a process of searching and examination, you will often find that the patent examiner will say, well, I don't like this because it's too close to this one here. And so you've got to sort of narrow down the scope of what you're actually claiming as your patented feature. And at the end of the day, you end up with a patent that's sort of a fair scope for what your inventive concept is. However, the downside of this is that it takes time and money, and it can take several years and quite a lot of money in the UK and elsewhere if you apply for patents elsewhere before you get your conventional patent granted. If you are applying for a patent for a patent box application, then all you're trying to cover is the particular product itself. So this may be as I said, a tiny product, and it may be a very specific thing, so you can draft your patent very narrowly. What that means is that you don't have to worry too much about the effort, which is where a lot of patent attorneys' effort goes into drafting claims as broadly as possible. You can have a detailed description that's cheaper and easier to draft and to file, and hopefully you will get your patent quicker because you've got a much more limited patent. The patent examiner will do in their searching won't find sort of more irrelevant material. They'll only find material that's very irrelevant to that specific thing. So the bottom line of that is that with a patent box application, if you specifically make one, you can get a patent granted much quicker and, more importantly, much cheaper than you could before, which you will still be able to claim patent box tax relief on, which is a big bonus. So what should one be doing now if you're considering the patent box system? Well, first of all, you should have a look at whether you've got any existing patents. Have a look at those and think, do they cover products you're making or intend to make? And if they are, then you can make a patent box claim for them. And also, if you have any patent applications pending, you might like to try accelerating the process of this, or indeed try to, as I said, narrow down the scope of this now, so that you can hopefully get your patent granted nice and quickly so you can claim the tax relief. As a second part of the strategy, now you should be considering what are your potential products? What are you thinking of at the moment? Can I file patent applications for these now? You can only apply for a patent if a product is not yet in the public domain. So if you've got a product out there in the public domain, it's probably too late to apply for a patent. But suddenly you think, what you're doing now, can I apply for a patent? Is it worth thinking of a patent box patent for this? And then it's also worth developing a strategy for your sort of future patent and IP system, if you like, ideas. Work out, do I want to try to patent more? If I want to try to use the patent box, do I specifically try to encourage my engineers, my designers, to come to me as soon as they've come up with ideas, and to think whether this can be applied for as a conventional patent, or if this is going to end up in a product, can I address a specific patent for patent box purposes? Few statistics here that I found from official HMRC records. In 2019 to 20, you'll see that 1,400 companies used the patent box and claimed 1,220 million, 1,200 trillion, right? Yes, pounds. And in 2021, it was 1,205 million. So the use is, the patent box is being used, billion, sorry, not trillion, what we're talking about. So the patent box is being used quite extensively, and it's also interestingly that a lot of the companies using it are, although a lot of the companies using it are major corporations, it is used to a significant amount by SMEs as well, and has been found to be very beneficial. It's a lot of money being claimed. I'll move over now to my colleague Peter to give some other patent presentation.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so John's spoken through some of the advantages of looking at whether you might have technology that you're developing that could qualify and could benefit from this patent box scheme. The first question, obviously, is always, have I got anything that could potentially be patentable? And that's, I think, a question that some people don't always find it easy to answer. I think a lot of the time as well, some of the development work you're doing, you might not realize that it could be subject of a patent. John mentioned earlier, developments don't necessarily need to be particularly complex or revolutionary to qualify for patent protection. And so understanding what the requirements are can be beneficial to a business. Just to briefly mention what the requirements are, and if you've dealt with patents in the past, you might be familiar with this. But generally, there are about three main requirements for patentability. John's mentioned already, the invention must be novel. That means it's got to be new and not already in the public domain. It's also got to then involve something called an inventive step. And then the third requirement is that it needs to be capable of being made or used in some kind of industry. And that will obviously apply to the vast majority of technical innovations that you're making. But as I've mentioned, importantly, what's not required, it doesn't need to be something complex or revolutionary. And sometimes a lot of the development processes that you're going through to improve your products, to improve your methods of manufacture, might well qualify if they're making some sort of improvement. So just to sort of narrow down on those requirements, particularly novelty and inventive step. Novelty is really quite simple. The question is whether the invention forms part of what we call the state of the art. And really the question is, has it been done before? Has someone else done it? Has it been published elsewhere? And have you published it yourself, or have you released a product already that has it out there? And as John mentioned, it's really important that this question is considered, or patentability is considered, before the product goes out on the market, because it might be too late once it already has, because it would then not be considered novel. But the second requirement of inventive step, the way this is examined can differ from country to country, but broadly speaking, the question we're looking to answer is whether what distinguishes your invention is something that would be considered obvious to a person skilled in the arts. And now that can be a difficult question to assess yourself. If you're carrying out this sort of innovation, you're by your very nature quite an innovative person, and you might not view the changes you're making, or the modifications and developments you're making, as being particularly inventive. However, it's important to understand that actually this person skilled in the art is not necessarily a particularly creative or inventive person themselves. It's just someone who would be familiar in the field of technology, and who might be able to perform and put into effect this kind of technology. Let's say, we're building an engine, and whether they would actually be able to put the parts together. But it's not necessarily someone who would be creative or considered to be creative. And so the questions really to ask are what problems have been overcome by this particular development, what improvements have been made, and if you're overcoming some sort of problem or making some sort of improvement, there's a good chance that actually there is an inventive step in what you've done, and this development might be something that could qualify for patent protection. Now, obviously, that's just a very broad and brief overview of the requirements, and there are big books of case law discussing these matters and whether something is new and whether something is inventive. But I think the advice would be, if you've got an idea and you're not quite sure, consult your patent attorney. And if you've got experience within this field already, you might already have contacts. Obviously, we're happy to answer questions. And most patent attorneys will be very happy to offer a consultation initially, at least for no cost. So it's worth pursuing the idea sooner rather than later, just to see if what you've got might actually qualify. And as John mentioned, particularly if we're just considering a patent box application, then really the scope doesn't need to be particularly broad. But there is some other help out there as well, actually, if you want to dive a bit deeper, and I think this was worth mentioning at this point. The UK IPO, the Intellectual Property Office, has a scheme called the IP Audit Plus, and in this they offer funding of up to £2,500 towards the cost of an IP audit. The only requirement is that the business pays the first £500 of the cost. So at £500, you're getting an IP audit to the value of about £3,000, and what that gives you is a team of IP professionals to come into the business, to have a chat with you, to look through all of your IP. Patents can be, inventions can be one aspect of that, and help you get an idea of where you might have IP already, where you might have potential IP, what ideas might be worth pursuing, and how you can best manage and protect that, and even commercialize that. Typically, we would carry that out, audits like that we would carry out with a patent and a trademark attorney, and so this looks at a very broad range of your IP, and it's a really valuable resource to sort of get an understanding of what you've got going on. The process for this is to apply through Innovate UK Edge, and I imagine many of you will already have contacts at Innovate UK and may already be aware of this scheme, but if not, contact Innovate UK, contact us to ask about it, because I think it's a really valuable resource that can really benefit businesses and give you some ideas about how you might go about protecting what you've got. In the past, there have also been additional funding schemes available to help implement recommendations that come out of these IP audits. At the moment, there aren't any schemes like that open, but they do come around periodically. So it's worth, again, talking to your specialist at Innovate UK or an IP attorney that you might have contact with, to ask if there are extra funding options available for taking this forward, and that can help towards the cost of preparing a patent application, for example, and can really help. So worth keeping that in mind. But that brings me on just to give a brief overview of what types of IP there are. And I won't spend too long on this, but it's just worth bearing in mind there are very different types of IP that your business might own. We've talked about patents that cover inventions or technical creations within the business. Trademarks are typically signs associated with your brand, and by signs we mean your company name, any logos that you might be using, anything that kind of distinguishes your brand over others. Those can be protected by trademarks and are worth also pursuing to make sure the goodwill in your business is protected. There are also design rights available, and whereas patents protect the technical elements of a product, potentially, a design right would protect the appearance of it, how it looks, and this is aiming to stop people copying what you're doing if they like the look of what you've created, and they're really worth pursuing. There are unregistered rights that exist automatically, but also there are more useful registered rights that are worth looking into. And so if you've got a product that has an aesthetic element to it, it's worth considering whether or not there might be value in a design registration. And then also the other type of IP you might be familiar with is copyright. That's an automatic right that will protect any original works. So typically the categories are literary, dramatic, musical, and artistic works. It might exist in businesses in photographs that you use, images that you use in your website, in any materials that you're producing. It arises automatically. But again, this is something that an IP audit can help you identify what copyright you might have, and it's worth protecting to stop people using what you've created. So the second part of this presentation, we're just going to talk a little bit about some changes to the European patent system. Again, if you've got some familiarity with the patent application process, you might already have some understanding, but there has been some recent changes that are worth mentioning. The idea behind these changes is to make it easier for you to protect inventions in more countries across Europe. They're changes that have been in discussion for decades, and they've been off again and on again at various moments, and finally this year the big changes have happened. So we just wanted to highlight it because it might be something that is helpful to you, and again we can answer more questions. There's a lot of complexity to the systems, but we just wanted to identify that now, so that it's something you're aware of if you are working in the world of patents. This typically is more beneficial to you, less so if you're just interested in the patent box incentives to patenting your inventions. If you're actually looking to protect your inventions, to try and prevent competitors from copying you or coming up with similar ideas based on the same technical concepts, getting some broader protection across Europe might be something that's really valuable to you. The system, well, the new thing that's come in is called the Unitary Patent, which you might have heard of. Taking a step back, John mentioned patents are territorial. If you want to protect an invention in different countries, you need to apply for a patent in each different country, broadly speaking. There are various international and regional systems that will help simplify that process, where you can file a central application, and eventually you'll get it through and you'll go through the process in each separate country. So they aim to simplify it and streamline it, but ultimately you need to end up with a separate patent in each country that you want your invention protected in. Now, as you can appreciate, there's a lot of countries in the world, there's a lot of markets that you might be interested in operating in, and protecting your invention across many countries can be prohibitively expensive, not just in the actual cost of applying for the patent and going through the examination process, but also in keeping the patent going once it's actually granted. So typically the strategy is to focus on the key markets for your business, select a few countries, maybe across Europe, other countries across the world, where you most want to protect your invention from being copied by others. So I've mentioned there are regional systems, and the European patent system is is one of these. You can obtain a European patent, and that's an application process that takes place at the European Patent Office. It's a central application procedure that results in the grant of a European patent. And a European patent in principle covers all of the EU countries, but also a lot more than just EU countries. It's a body that's outside of the EU, so it's actually not affected by Brexit. UK is still part of it, so European patent will cover the UK. European patent will also cover places like Switzerland and Norway that are not part of the EU. You can even extend the protection from a European patent to places like Cambodia. So it's actually quite broad, and it's not necessarily associated only with the EU. But ultimately, whilst we refer to it as a European patent, it's not a unitary right. It's not one patent that covers the whole of Europe or all of the countries associated with the system. It's granted and it's a bundle of independent patents for different countries, and you need to choose where you validate your European patent to decide where you want to protect it. There are disadvantages to this because there are costs associated with this validation process, and so many businesses will choose only a few, for example, the UK, Germany and France, because those might be the biggest markets. You also then have to pay separate renewal fees. Essentially, once it's granted and validated, it's treated as a separate patent in each country, and you need to keep it going and pay these renewal fees to keep it going each year. And across multiple countries, if you're protecting it in many countries in Europe, those costs can add up. But also, if you do find that someone's infringing your patent across Europe, you have to enforce it separately in each country. And then again, that can add significant costs. If you want to bring a legal action in Germany and in France and in Italy, for example, those are 3 separate actions that need to take place. So these are the shortcomings of the existing European system. And that's what brings in this unitary patent that has come in as of the 1st of June this year. Now, a unitary patent is a single patent. It will cover 17 different countries. Now, the complication is that those are not all of the countries that are part of the European patent system, unfortunately. Various reasons, some political, some others. It doesn't cover every country. It won't cover, for example, any non-EU country, and that means the UK and Switzerland, for example. There are also EU countries that have decided that they're not going to participate at the moment. Spain is one example, Poland another example. So it will only cover 17 countries. Importantly, those are some of the biggest markets in Europe, so Germany, France, Netherlands and Italy. It will cover, and it's a single patent that covers all of those territories. So this just gives a sort of overview, a comparison of the traditional system versus the new unitary system. So on the left-hand side there, this is the process that you'll go through to get a patent in each country. You file a European patent application that goes through examination at the European Patent Office, and ultimately, if you're successful, the patent is granted. And as I've mentioned, we go through the validation process to validate it in the countries. So let's say in this example, we want protection in Germany, France, Netherlands, and the UK. We'll validate it separately in each of those countries, and going forward, you have to renew the patent in each of those countries. With the new system, we go through the same process. So it's all the same. We file a European patent application that's examined at the EPO, and once it's granted, again, we validate. However, we now have an option to select a unitary patent if we want one, and that unitary patent will cover all of the countries that participate, and in this example, it includes Germany, France, and Netherlands. Importantly, it also includes 14 other countries. The protection is 17 countries, and you then renew it as a single patent. So it's a much simpler process, and it will have much broader geographical coverage. It's also worth noting that if you do then still want protection in the countries that aren't taking part in this unitary system, you still need to validate it in the way that you used to. So UK is a good example of that. So this has some real advantages, we think. As I've mentioned, it gives us very broad and wide geographical coverage, certainly compared to the existing system. If you wanted to protect a patent in 17 countries across Europe previously, it would have cost a lot of money. This is a much cheaper way of doing it if you want protection in many countries. because it's a single validation process, it can reduce costs at the validation stage. So it's a little bit cheaper to kind of get from the application process at the EPO to then actually having a patent that's effective in various countries across Europe. And also, as I've mentioned, actually maintaining that patent is also simpler. You only have to pay one renewal fee. You pay that centrally rather than paying it separately in each country. So it's not only potentially cheaper, depending on which countries you choose, it's also actually a much simpler process to manage, and that typically will lead to reduced costs in the long run too. So that whether or not it's cost effective will depend on where you would want the protection, and the unitary patent system essentially becomes more cost effective the more countries you want protection in. And typically we would say the renewals will work out as being cost effective if you want protection in about 4 of the participating countries. So let's say you did want to protect your invention in Germany, France, Italy, and the Netherlands. The unitary patent would be a good way to go because the cost would be essentially the same, but you'd also get protection in a number of other countries across Europe. But also importantly, if an infringement does occur in multiple countries across Europe, you only have to bring one legal action, and you can bring that at the Unified Patent Court, which is part of this whole new system. And that's making it a lot easier for you to enforce a patent rather than having to go to court in every single country that you want to enforce your patent in. We've now got a central system that is hopefully more streamlined than the national courts. It's hopefully more cost effective, and also because we're bringing a single action in potentially for infringements in multiple countries in one place, it's going to be much easier for a patentee to protect their idea and actually enforce their patent. So there are real benefits, I think, to this new system for people looking to protect their invention across Europe, where costs would be an issue. There is a flip side to that as well, because there's a possibility that parties can challenge your patent. And traditionally, because they're separate patents in separate countries, that would need to happen separately in separate countries, and that can make it harder for people to challenge your patent. With the new unitary system, that can be done centrally as well. So there are not pitfalls, there are downsides to it, I suppose, and that all needs to be weighed up and balanced. And whether a unitary patent suits you in terms of the protection it will give you and in terms of the costs involved will depend on the situation. And so we would recommend having a good conversation with your IP attorney. If you don't have one, obviously we're very happy to have a conversation with you about whether this is something that would suit your needs. But it's worth being aware of and knowing that it exists, because it might be helpful for you going forward if you are operating across Europe. There's one brief note that I just want to make. It's also worth bearing in mind, if you have already got European patents that in the past that are still in force and are protected and validated in some of these participating countries, you might already know, and I suspect you will already know if you've got European patents, that they will fall automatically under the jurisdiction of this new court. And that means it might be easier for someone to challenge that patent. And so you need to make a decision now about whether you want to opt it out. And it's possible at the moment we're in a transitional period while the court finds its feet, where owners of European patents can elect to keep them outside of this new system. So the headline is, if you do have a European patent, talk to your IP attorney if you haven't already, and think about this as sooner rather than later. So I think that's all we had to say. Hopefully it's had some useful information from you on different aspects on both protection in the UK and how that can have some financial benefits, but also how, if you're wanting to protect your invention in more countries, there are new systems in place that will help you to do that. And so I think we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Peter. That's great. Everyone, if I could just remind you, please use the Q&A section in Teams to submit any of your questions, and we'll be happy to answer those now. We do have a couple of questions that were sent prior to the webinar, so I will let you decide who's answering. I won't put anyone on the spot. Can you advise, how long does it take does the patent process usually take? How quickly can this be done for like a patent box application?
For a conventional patent, it can take several years. The British Patent Office gives a so-called compliance period by which a patent must be in order of 4.5 years. And it does quite often take that time. There are methods you can use to accelerate procedures, but it does take several years. And when you're talking about international applications as well, it can take quite a while. With a patent box patent, because it is very narrow, and by using various acceleration methods, we find that we can get a patent box granted and published within a year or so. So it can be considerably quicker. Obviously, you can then start to use the patent much quicker.
Great, thank you very much. I think we also, you mentioned that some countries like Spain, Poland, Switzerland, they're not part of the Unitary Patent system. Could other countries join in the future?
Yes, potentially so. So at the moment, 17 countries have signed up and have decided to be part of the system. So that's where we stand at the moment. A unitary patent that's granted now would cover those 17 countries, and that includes Germany, France, Netherlands, Italy. If you want to have a look at all the countries, then there's some good resources out there. We can also send them through. There are a few countries that have signed up in principle to the agreement but haven't yet ratified it. So they are quite likely to join in the future, but we'll just need to wait to see when. Typically smaller countries. Ireland is one example of those countries that might be of interest. Czech Republic, Hungary. So there are a few there that might sign up in the future, and we expect will sign up in the future. There are some EU countries that have stated that they don't have any intention to sign up. Spain is a big example, Poland as well, and Croatia. In principle, they could change their minds. In principle, they could still sign up at some point in the future, but at present, it doesn't seem that there is any intention to there. But yeah, then as I mentioned, there are other countries within the European patent system that are not part of the EU, and that means that's sort of a bar to them joining this new system. UK, for example, Switzerland, Norway won't become part of this system in the future.
Yes, as Peter said, it must be EU countries to join the system, and the UK was obviously all set to join it. And in fact, one part of the court system was going to be in London. In fact, judges have been appointed before Brexit, and offices have been established. I think even IT equipment have been put into place, but obviously that fell by the wayside with Brexit. And some countries like Ireland, for example, who are, I believe, quite keen on the system, they have a constitutional issue that for things like this, they have to have a referendum before they can join it. And obviously that's a tricky thing to have.
We've got another question from one of our attendees. Can universities use the patent box?
Yes, well, it depends if they're paying. I don't know if a university is paying corporation tax. Then yes, they can, and they meet the qualifying requirements of having a UK or European patent or whatever, and that the work in developing the patent was done by the university, by the company actually paying the corporation tax. Then yes, I'm sure they can.
Okay, that's really interesting. So just a reminder to everyone, we will send the slides following today's event. So you can have access to the details of Peter and John, and you're always welcome to take those conversations further or get in touch with them if you have any questions. We've got someone's raised their hand. Do you want to, Lawrence, would you mind putting your question in the Q&A panel, please? And then we do have another question for you guys. So in terms of patent boxes, can you backdate those patent box claims, or is there, what are the rules around that?
Peter?
Yes, in principle, those can be backdated. If you're making income on invention during the patent pending process, so John mentioned that we can accelerate that and get it through potentially as quickly as a year. If you might have multiple motivations for seeking patent protection, and patent box might be one of them, but you also might be trying to get as broad a scope of protection as possible, and that's, as John's mentioned, it typically takes longer. If you do have income coming in from those inventions during that patent pending period, claims can be backdated for up to 6 years to cover income that you derive from that. So you can't actually make a claim until you've got a granted patent, but it is possible to backdate the claim. Also, sort of generally speaking, it's worth bearing in mind that a claim needs to be made within 2 years of the end of the relevant accounting period that the income has been derived during.
Okay.
Yep. One strategic point on that is that one thing you can do is you can apply for a patent very narrowly, but with some statements that are sort of broader, that cover your invention in different variations, modifications. And so you can therefore get your patent box patent granted very quickly to give you some sort of protection very quickly. But you can also file what we call a divisional application. You can divide off other applications, whether in Europe, UK or whatever, for that broader concept. So you can kind of have your cake and eat it. You can get a quick patent granted quickly to a very specific invention, but you can still try it over the subsequent few years to get a broader patent granted that you could then use for conventional purposes to stop other people from copying your invention or using modifications to your invention, which can be quite a powerful sort of tactic.
That is great. Thank you very much. We've still got time for some questions. So if anyone wants to raise a question, please use the Q&A panel on the side. But this, you've covered quite a lot of ground there. I think there's been a lot of really insightful details that you've shared. Thank you so much. I think
that's just an important point to make, is we have given a bit of a whistle-stop tour on some quite complicated issues, and the patent world can be complex and confusing. So we reiterate, more than happy to have a chat with you if you've got if you want to delve into something deeper or a little bit more specific relating to your business or your technology. And as John's mentioned also, that there are very good accountancy firms, part of the STC network, that also have experience dealing with patent box relief. And it's also worth just mentioning, this is separate to R&D tax credits, which is another thing that people might be familiar with. And typically we find that people are more familiar with R&D tax credits and less familiar with patent box. These can be used in conjunction. They can be used together. There's no bar to using one or the other, and I think they're quite complementary schemes that are worth exploiting.
That's great. Thank you very much. Well, I think we'll wrap things up now. As I mentioned, slides will be available after the event. If any of you want to take this conversation further, please get in touch with either us or get in touch directly with John and Peter.